Good morning and welcome to Green Pastors Church online devotion, and welcome to day 5. And I want to encourage you guys for joining with us. We've had so much great word and encouragement this week in these devotions, and I want to thank the guys that have brought that. But also want to encourage all of you parents that have made it to Friday. You've made it to Friday. You overnight have had to learn how to become teachers and help your kids. And I'm sure, like your house, like mine, that in our house this week has been plenty of craziness and pressure, whereas we're trying to help teach our kids in a way that they're reminding us day and daily that we don't teach that in the way that their teachers have been teaching them that at school, and tension has built up and frustration. And I'm sure, like in your house, you have tried to work that and navigate that, but it's been difficult enough. So I want to say well done and welcome to Friday, which means you're at the end of the week. You get a break from being a teacher and get prepared again for a new week. And I want to just encourage you from that. And I want to just let you know that you're doing a great job, and keep going and keep doing the work that you're doing. And in the middle of this cabin fever thing, I found myself doing things that's way off normal. And if you were speaking to Karen, she would tell you that right now. Where last night I found myself in the house and it's like, Karen, darling, do you mind if I go and do the groceries? And she, what? Do you mind if I go and do the groceries? So anyway, we head off to do the groceries, get what we need, or get all the groceries we need, get them back in the car, and are heading back home. And Karen is in the driving seat. I'm in the passenger. Don't find myself being a great passenger at all. I think I'm not a bad driver. Karen would say different. I do get a little distracted because I want to see who I know on the road on the way home, but I prefer me driving than Karen driving. But she's driving on the way home and I'm in the passenger seat. She drives faster than I would like her to be driving and looks at me too much while she's speaking. And then we happen to be coming around this sharp bend, as it were, and I find myself, as she's driving around this bend, I find myself reaching out to put my foot on the brake, this invisible brake, as if I think that I'm helping, as if I think that I'm helping her how to control and to kind of navigate the car. And then another part of my head is saying to me, what in under goodness are you doing, Barry? And I'm sure that I'm not the only person that is there and has done that before. I know some of you guys are smiling right now, have been in the same place, and you've wondered, what in under goodness am I doing here? And some part of our head has us convinced that we're helping. And another part of us is like, what in under goodness are you doing? And I think that's something like what you and I are like in this world. Whenever we're in a relationship with Jesus, we feel that we can help God out, and we feel that on this journey that by attending church and by praying, we feel that we can help God do all of what he needs to do as God. And in fact, he doesn't need our help at all. He desires our prayers and intimacy and walk with him, but he actually doesn't need it. He is God all by himself. And I want to encourage us just from this guy that wrote this book in Romans, Paul, and he says in Romans chapter 8 and the verse number 38 and 39, he tells us this, and I think these are very important words and hope and truth at this very important time that we find ourselves. He says that I am convinced that nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I think that's important for the season that we find ourselves in. There are so much going on, and we're being convinced by social media stuff, and it's bombarding the airs, and whenever we're talking to people, and fear is being rampant up, and there's so much of what is coming at us in this pandemic that's bringing fear on so many of us. But Paul tells us in this verse in Romans chapter 8, he says that I'm convinced, and I want to challenge you and me this morning. I want to challenge you. What are you convinced of this morning? I'm telling you that you can be convinced, like Paul says here. I'm convinced that nothing can separate me from the love of God. Neither death, nor life, neither angel, nor demon, neither fear for today, nor worries for tomorrow. Not even the powers of hell can separate us from the love of God. None of it can separate us from the love of God. He's got us. And I'm telling you, that's something that we need to grab a hold of, and something we need to be encouraged in this morning, that he's got us, and nothing can separate you and me from the love of God. And he said it in a different way in another book, in a book called Philippians, and he said it in Philippians, the first chapter, and verse number 6. He says that I am certain that he who began a good work in me will be faithful to bring it to completion. He who began a good work in me, he who began a work in me is faithful to keep me in the midst of all of the stuff that's going on right now. And there are so many things that seem to be uncertain in our world, and that seem to be so convincing of these things, but or unconvincing. But I'm telling you this morning that we can be convinced in God this morning, not convinced in a system or in a process, but in a person, and his name is Jesus. We can be convinced in him because he has got us. And there was this other guy I want to encourage us with this morning. There's this guy David in the Bible way back. David was anointed and that he would be king in the time to come. And we know David to be, and how David is referred to is he's a man after God's own heart. And David was so skilled and so good in what God had put on his life, that as he continued to go out, then his king at that time, Saul, became so jealous of him that he had to run into hiding. And then Saul wanted to wipe him out and get rid of him. But then we find ourselves with David in the middle of this. Now, this is a man after God's own heart. We find him in the middle of this place where he runs to this guy in 1 Samuel and 27th chapter. This guy was, his name was Achish, some may say, who was the king of the Philistines, aka the enemy, was who he ran to in the middle of where he found himself, in the middle of this season where all this stuff was coming in against him. He runs to the enemy. He runs into the enemy's camp, and he was convinced. And what had happened, and as we read in the first verse in that chapter in 27, that tells us that he thought to himself, that David thought to himself that he would be better to go and escape to the Philistines, and at least there Saul would stop chasing after him. So David finds himself coming from this place where a place where he was supposed to be, and then runs into the enemy's hands, as it were. He runs to the enemy because the times were hard and the times were tough. And I want to challenge you and me on that this morning. In this season and in this difficult time that we find ourselves, where are you and I running to? Are we running into fear? Are we running into agreement with things that's difficult, and we begin to agree and speak things over this virus that we nearly accept on ourselves and our families, and but we believe that God is our protector. And I want to encourage you this morning, I want to encourage you to hand it over to God. And what had happened in this circumstance, that as he set up safety in the enemy's camp, this is how good God is. This is how good that God is in working on our behalf, that what God had done, even working through the enemy. Because whenever they were going to come up against Saul, God worked through the enemy to tell David that he needs to leave and go back to his family. And so as he feels like rejected from the enemy and is sent out from there and is sent back, and on the way back, it took him 3 days to get back to Ziklag where his family was. And as they just arrived back in Ziklag, what happened is they found their families were gone. The whole place was burned. Their children and their livestock and their spouses were gone. And really their world was, and I suppose in a sense that anything that meant anything to them was gone. And what was the point? And at that point, because David made a really important decision at that point, David said to one of the men, he says, bring me the ephod. Bring me the ephod. And the men were so enraged with him, they were going to kill him. They were coming hard against him. And David said to one of the men, bring me the ephod. And what the ephod represented was the presence of God. He said, I need to come back to God. I need to come back to God and ask God what to do. I've made a mess. I made a mistake. And maybe that's where you and me have been. And maybe in the midst of this mess and pandemic that's happening across the world, maybe now is the time for you and me to come back to God. Maybe you've been walking with God for years, or you've been knowing in your heart that you need Jesus in your life. But maybe now in this season, like David, that you need to cry out in the presence of God and say, God, I need to come back to you. I need you in my life. I need to trust you to be my source. I don't need to be dependent on this and trying to control all by myself, God. I need to put my hope and my trust and my family in your hands. And so from that point, as they sought God, David and the men, as they sought God, God said to go after them and go after their children and their family. And they went and they rescued them. And that decision that David made there was one of the most important decisions in the middle of what was all the crisis and the hardship of what was going on. It was so important a decision, because that decision there set him up next to become king. And I want to challenge us in the middle of this season that we find ourselves in right now, in the middle of where we find ourselves right now, and what you're convinced of right now. You need to know that if you're not convinced in the Lord this morning, you need to go and spend time in his presence and allow him to come close to you. Because he says that whenever we seek him with all of our heart, then he says we're going to find him. And this morning he says, come and find me. Come and draw from me this morning. Because he says, I'm the same yesterday. I'm the same God I was there. I'm the same today. And I will be the same then. You can trust me. You can't put your hope and your trust in systems and all of this stuff around the world, but you can put your hope, your family, and your future trust in me, because in me is where life is. Guys, this morning I want to encourage us with that. With all of this uncertainty and all of this unconvincing stuff around us this day, I encourage you today that there is one person that you can be convinced of today, and his name is Jesus. And I want to encourage you today to put your trust in him. Guys, have a great day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the weekend. See you later.